made landowners and few wealthy people corner the market. They simply disassembled the market order. People of Jeju did not trust the US military government since they entrusted administrative power to policemen, police force, who had been serving as colonial official under Japanese occupation. On March 1st, 1947, a great multitude of people in Jeju, nearly 30,000, gathered to protest against the policy of US military authority, which did not prescribe any efficient remedy to resolve extreme food shortage and unemployment. In the beginning of this rally, people participated peacefully, but the police force, being afraid of the huge crowds gathered in the playground, they started to disperse them by force, which made people get excited and throw stones to police officers. As a result, 6 people, including 1 child, died. Following this clash, the whole islanders responded by going into general strike. The US military government let police suppress all protesters more severely by arrest and torture, which eventually caused the uprising of leftists who attacked 12 police stations in Jeju Island on April 3rd of 1948, which is coming, from which it comes the name 4-3 of Jeju. The leaders of the US military government solely commanded a total suppression of any leftist movement in Jeju at any cost. They ordered a scorched earth operation trying to eliminate any site of guerrilla force in the island. Now I would like to describe the real meaning of 4-3, Jeju 4-3, in Korean history. I myself kept asking in Jeju, what would be the implication of the massacre of 30,000 people in Korean's history and in our lives? Why so many innocent people, so many innocent civilians, including women and children, had to be mass murdered without knowing any reason? I suppose many people of Jeju had asked the same question in their heart for long decades. As I mentioned on the last stage of Joseon Dynasty, Joseon Monarchy of Korea, by resisting unjust government officials and despotic monarchy, people of grassroots became conscious of their own human dignity, self-esteem, and they realized that they deserved to be respected and honored as same human persons. People became awake on fundamental human rights, equality and freedom. And during Japanese colonial era, people continued to deepen their consciousness on human freedom and human rights, participating in the resistance to the exploitation and oppression of Japan. They learned that it is right and just to fight back even to the state authority when it performs injustice and violence, suppressing their fundamental human rights. The USA and Russia, who occupied the Korean peninsula with military forces, appeared to Korean people to be another foreigner who tread down their human rights. Especially in Jeju Island, where there were many migrants coming back from Japan with keen sense of resistance and national pride, the US military government looked like a continuation of another colonial system. The US military government employed the same people who served as police officers of Japanese Empire. The extreme financial crisis and food shortage gave them a great disappointment and anger. Furthermore, the US military government ordered a general election only in the southern part of the Korean Peninsula, which was decided in the UN, United Nations. And that the general election only in the south meant that their country was to be divided. The election and the establishment of government in southern half of Korea meant that the aspiration and hope to found a new state would be extinguished and dissolved. That is why people of Jeju strongly opposed the general election, and as a result, among 200 polling stations in whole Korea, Jeju was the only district where election ended invalid due to lack of voters. The US military government regarded it as an evidence that Jeju Island was totally under control of the Communist Party, and they ordered the blockade to blockade the northern coastline and to start a mop-up operation of leftists. Mr. Seungman Lee, elected as the first president of South Korea on August 15th of 1948, he succeeded the military policy of US military government regarding Jeju and sent a large number of troops to exterminate rebel forces in Jeju Island. It's been said that 4/3 was an unhappy incident in which ordinary civilians who had nothing to do with ideology got trapped in a chaotic situation after the liberation and massacred by the state authority. But it was not an incident happened, as I said, accidentally. It was a sign of time that a great energy seeking liberation from all kinds of injustice and evil, which oppress human dignity and rights, flowed from Korean history like lava flowing from a volcano. 4/3, Jeju 4/3, was a beautiful flower blossomed in historical stream of human liberation which flowed from Joseon monarchy through Japanese imperialism and Cold War era. 4/3 was an extension of martyrdom of innumerable victims who offered their lives for human dignity, equality, and freedom. Although they were brutally slaughtered, not knowing what was the reason, these innumerable unknown victims marched in the pilgrimage of martyrdom to glorify the value of human lives, which is absolutely irreplaceable by anything in the world. 2 weeks ago, on April 3rd of this month, President Moon Jae-in visited Jeju Peace Park, participating in the 70th memorial service of 4/3. Delivering his memorial address, Mr. Moon promised the absolute resolution of 4/3, apologizing for the crimes against humanity committed by the state authority. Mr. Moon consoled all bereaved families with sincere heart and humility. And it seems that now, after his address, many people of Jeju are barely ready to speak about 4-3 without fear anymore. I think it is our responsibility to dig out and to transmit lost memories of 4-3, which have been buried long time, for several decades, due to horrible trauma. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, keynote speech. And just we start session 1. Just speakers come. We start session 1 and recognition and responsibility of leadership. The Jeju Hoban Jasam Grand Tragedy during peacetime Korea. So, first speakers, I introduce Hope Elizabeth May from Central Michigan University, United States.
Hello? Okay, good. Good morning, afternoon. I do have some images, and there is a handout, and so one-page handout. I think some of you do have it.
If you don't have it, raise your hand.
And actually, there are a stack of handouts, the second row, yeah. And if you could maybe distribute them as well, that should save some time. So, following up on Bishop Kang's talk that you just heard, there's a lot of history that Bishop Kang went through, a lot of Korean history. And my goal for you is to understand and echo, actually, what Bishop Kang is talking about. And I'm sure many of you've never heard about 4-3 until today. Can you raise your hand if you're just hearing about Sasam or 4-3, like from this conference for the first time today? So quite a bit of you. So 4-3, April 3rd, Sasam in Korean. And my goal with my 15 minutes is to suggest, I totally agree with Bishop Kang that we need to recover these lost memories that are the result of trauma. Not only of residents of Jeju, but also of the United States. I don't know if you can tell, from the United States, but I've been to Korea many times. And I do consider it my mission, from the Holy Spirit, if you will, to educate English-speaking audiences about the US role in Korea, not only with Sasam, but before. Going back all the way to the 1800s. And there's this thread of history that is erased. And my goal is to broaden the temporal lens. So we're focused on one day, 4-3. But also Bishop Kang mentioned 3-1, March 1st. March 1st, he mentioned March 1st, 1947, and he mentioned March 1st, 1919. What was happening in 1919 in the world? Bishop Conf mentioned the Russian Revolution of 1917. So interesting, because there's another story. What's happening in 1919? Anybody know? What's happening in France in 1919? Paris Peace Conference, end of World War I. And in fact, in 1918, President Woodrow Wilson, in January 1918, January 8th, 1918, gives a speech to the US Congress where he outlays his famous 14 points amongst self-determination. That's 1918. The story that I've heard about March 1st is not that it's inspired by the Russian Revolution. There's another version, okay? And so that's a sort of deeper context, and that's what I'm going to be doing with my maybe now 13 minutes, okay? So does everybody have a handout? Anybody who does not have a handout, if you could raise your hand. There's a couple people over here. Anybody out there? Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm not used to sitting, and I'm used to walking around with a lapel mic, so excuse me. We're dialing back. When we dial back from April 3rd, 1948 to March 1st. March 1st, 1947, you'll see. This is from the Jeju Museum. And it says 3-1, the March 1st shooting incident, a key trigger for the April 3 uprising. So if you didn't get it, Bishop Conf said, people are gathered on March 1st, 1947. Why? They're celebrating an anniversary. It's the anniversary of March 1st, 1947. It's the 28th anniversary of this nonviolent, democratic, is also the very important word, democratic uprising. That is, all people were involved, all classes, women, children, everyone. This is just so poignant when you understand Korean history. All people participated, all classes, on March 1st, 1919. It was against Japan's colonization. Some people begin at 1905 with the Ulster Treaty, some people begin at 1910, whatever. Japan is a bad neighbor to Korea, okay? And so it was a bad neighbor beginning in 1905. So by 1919, it's time to speak out. And what inspires, so this is actually a picture from March 1st, 1919. Let's see. But why did that happen? One version, Russian Revolution, 1917. Another version, I don't know, you're all students. Go look it up, do your due diligence. Another version, Woodrow Wilson gives his 14-point speech on January 1918. The word self-determination travels from Washington, D.C. to Korean students in Japan. They're studying in Japan. Many Korean students studied in Japan. They hear this word that actually, we're reorganizing the world at the end of World War I. And guess what? Now all countries are going to have democracy. That is their human right. So Tokyo students on February 8th, 1919, so 11 months after this, Woodrow Wilson, self-determination, travels through space and time. Lands, the seed lands on Korean students in Japan. They hear it. At the YMCA in Tokyo, they have a kind of demonstration. They write a Declaration of Independence. And there's an underground movement from the Japan students to Korean students and other Koreans on the mainland. And through the underground movement, they say, you must stage a similar uprising. So that's what happens. So this is being planned. And this is done in connection with the funeral of King Gojong, the the end of the Joseon dynasty, the last one. Okay? He dies on January 22nd, 1919. So this big funeral is planned for March. I only remember January 22nd because it's actually my birthday, but not 1919. So when we dial back and we understand March 1st, the significance of March 1st, the significance of March 1st to Jeju, it also helps us to understand this is international history. It is not just about the United States and Korea, it's about Japan. Bishop Kong mentioned the provisional government set up in Shanghai originally. This is a great story of international history. So there's a picture of the Korean provisional government, originally set up in Shanghai, China. So that's April 1919. So you have to understand March 1st, 19 is the beginning of the organized independence and democracy and self-determination movement. It is and why is inspired by Woodrow Wilson's vision. Interestingly, this independence movement, this movement for self-determination, was not just happening in Korea or in China. Although there were a lot of Koreans in the United States. And I don't know if you all can see him. I don't know if you all can see the flags that he's holding. But he's holding a US flag, and he's holding a Korean flag. And this is in April 1919, a week after the provisional government is organized in Shanghai, and it's in Philadelphia. And actually, this is in the very location where the United States had its Continental Congress, and that is Sigmund Rhee sitting in that chair, and that is the chair of George Washington. Okay, he's sitting in, this is a very sort of symbolic, so what's happening in the United States is that the Korean community involved in the democracy and independence movement are seizing this moment and really connecting it to US history, the history of the revolution. Okay. So this is also Sojay Pil, some of you may have heard of him, Philip Jason, very important activist in the Korean independence movement. So all of that's happening. I have 5 minutes. So I'm not going to read you the quotes on my handout because there's not enough time, but basically, the title of my talk, Recognition and Responsibility, comes from Eric Yamamoto. Eric Yamamoto has a famous article on social healing. And he mentions 4 R's: recognition, responsibility, reconstruction, reparation. Recognition and responsibility. Recognition of what? And I'm saying, dial back, broaden your temporal lens. Recognition of Korea's repeated attempts for recognition as an independent nation. And so this is 1919. These are documents. Korea is petitioning the Paris Peace Conference. They send memoranda to not only President Wilson, but also to the conference, to the secretariat. So this is in French, actually, and it's hard to see the date, but Korea is appealing to the United States because Woodrow Wilson has used this phrase, self-determination. And so there they are submitting their memorandum, 1919. This is another piece, and there's quotes. I don't have time to read the quotes, they're on your handout. This is also from the Peace Conference, Korean Delegation, 1919, the claim of the Korean people and nation from liberation from Japan and for the reconstitution of Korea as an independent state. There is a movement for independence and self-determination. And Korea is always there at these international meetings saying, recognize, recognize. Quote on handout. This is actually a memorandum to Sumner Wells. These are from archives from the US State Department between 1941 and 1944. And it's one of the Korean groups organized in the United States thanking Sumner Wells for considering the recognition of Korea, just considering it. So there's appeals going to the State Department. This is 19 1942. And this is my favorite document, actually. It took me some digging to find, but if you're interested, it's the UN Library has this document in New York. Before the United Nations is being organized, and if you're rusty on, oh my gosh, rusty on your history, the United Nations is formally, and the UN Charter formally enters into force in June of 1945. This is April 1945. Korea is writing a memorandum to the United Nations saying, let us in. It's time. Japan surrendered. We've been appealing to you for years. And the UN Charter is October, June, but Koreas don't become members until 1991. Okay. So my point being, so there's a quote from that. We need to look at this deeper history. Actually, it gets worse because you don't even have to, even before World War I, this appeal to the United States begins because the United States had a treaty with Korea of 1882 where the United States promised if another country acts unjustly or oppressively, the US will come to your aid. So when Japan begins its bad neighbor activity in 1905, guess what? They're there petitioning to the United States. They meet with President Theodore Roosevelt at the Portsmouth Peace Conference at the end of the Russian-Japanese War. They send, there's another delegate to the US State Department, Homer Hulbert, a great cosmopolitan individual. 1907, they go to the Hague. That's how I learned about them. I go to the Hague a lot. Hague, the International Capital of Peace and Justice. Hague of the World Court, International Court of Justice, as well as the International Criminal Court. That's how I started to learn about Korea. I'm not an Asian studies person. Never. I do peace history. So they were there in 1907. They appealed in 1919 to President Wilson. All these dates are on your handout. 1921, the Washington Disarmament Conference, appealing again. League of Nations, yes, they're there at the League of Nations in 1933, warning against Japan's aggression. Japan being the first country to leave the League of Nations in 1933 before Germany. And Korea is always warning the world, if you're trying to make the world safe for democracy, because that was the pretext used by Woodrow Wilson for the US entry into World War I, if you're trying to make the world safe for democracy, you have to do something about Japanese aggression. That's all throughout. And it's before Pearl Harbor. It's also, they're there at the UN. So these are just some documents that show their early appeals to recognize. This is the newsletter from the Hague Conference, 1907. This is the 1921-22 Conference on Disarmament. And when we do understand this deeper history, following up on Bishop Kong's talk, there's this thread here, and there's a thread of democracy. There's a thread of democracy coming from Korea, and it is inspired by the United States. I showed you the pictures of Sigmund Reed sitting in Philadelphia. And the United States is just ignoring and refusing. And so, when we understand these repeated appeals for recognition, we do understand that this is not just an accident, as Bishop Kong said. This is a natural, foreseeable is the legal term, totally foreseeable event. Concluding food for thought. We're talking about responsibility here. We can talk about moral responsibility, we can talk about legal responsibility. They're very different. Clearly, moral responsibility is there. It's a no-brainer. This is just a concluding food for thought. If you don't know about Commodore, I'm sure all you know about Commodore Perry, those of you who are students studying Asian studies. Commodore Perry and his ship from the United States that forced Japan, called gunboat diplomacy. Japan did not want to deal with other countries. And Commodore Perry came in and said, under gunpoint, said, you will open up and trade with other countries, or else you're going to have to deal with this navy. So Japan opened up. And at the Tokyo War Tribunals in 1946, and this quote is on your handout actually, so it's under concluding food for thought, number 5. One of the individuals who was prosecuted, he's also known as the mastermind behind the invasion of Manchuria, and sort of like, why are you prosecuting me? And he says, and I'm just going to start from the quote. He's saying that Japan learned that other countries were a fearfully aggressive lot. And so for its own defense, it took your own country, the United States, as its teacher, and set about how to be aggressive. You might say, we became your disciples. So this is Japan saying this to the United States, like, you taught us this. You came into us under threat of violence and forced us. Why are you, like, we learned statecraft and foreign policy from you. It's aggression. So we became your disciples. So lastly, Bishop Kong ended, with talking about Sigmund Rhee, and how Sigmund Rhee learned from the United States this like really violent response. Okay, so there's this being taught, and this is concluding food for thought. But the last thing, 'cause I think I'm definitely out of time, from Hamsa Khan, who is such an important voice in the democracy movement in Korea. He's the only Korean nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. There's really not a lot of his translated into English. But one of the things that is translated is his book on Korean history called Queen of Suffering. The very last sentence of that book is, "Put your sword down and think hard." So thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker, I just introduce next speakers. Hwang Soo-kyung from the University of Sydney.
My name is Soo-kyung Hwang, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference. The title of my speech is Surviving the Cold War, Widows of Jeju Sasang and the Korean War. Due to the time limits, I probably won't cover the Korean War part as much. If you can see behind, you'll see the photograph of commemoration in 1960. You see widows and you see also their children. So in